Now, today's passage, as I will introduce us, we are in John, just at the end of John 11 and the beginning of John 12, and it's up there. And I want to focus us on a couple of things, and perhaps even a contrast between those two things that you see up on the screen. There is a place, I just want to sort of, our comments, I want us to look at extravagant love and what that looks like and how appropriate that is. And when you contrast that with premeditated, murderous hatred, how damaging and how much we can miss out when we're in that condition. And somehow, even though we can associate with one or the other, I think at times, we can fall into different categories of this. So I'll bring there. I'm thinking about what kind of, this extravagant love. If you think about the Bible, it's all over the place in the sense of when you think about the prodigal son and the father who, after everything that had happened and the things that had been said and the hurt that had been caused by this son and the damage that had been done and the cost, not just emotionally and within the community, but financially, all of that stuff put together. And then we see this father just loving his son, put a ring on his finger, put a robe on him, kill the cow, let's have a party. And it was incredible love. It's just like, he just went, wow, let's just give it up for my son because he was lost and now he's found. That's extravagant love. We think about at a time when Joseph from the Old Testament, his brothers had so bitterly, and that was premeditated murderous thoughts that they had. In fact, they thought they had got rid of him, Joseph, and they tried to kill him. And they threw him in this well and they thought, he's gone. And sort of sold him out at the very least. They reasoned out he's into slavery. They sold him as a slave, Joseph, and from the Old Testament. Years later, Joseph becomes very powerful, ruler. And when they needed him, they show up. And Joseph could have had these premeditated, murderous hatred thoughts. I know if I was in his spot, I might have actually thought, yeah, now I got these guys. And I kind of was rooting for Joseph, now show them. But he was so pure at heart, and that's why he was Joseph, that he showed extravagant love, beyond love, of forgiveness and love and care, and reached out to them. So, as we introduced them this week, I want us to look at those ideas. Last week, Lazarus was raised from the dead. Now, we say that today like, well, it just happened and, we go on to the next day. But what an event. I mean, if it was today, that would have been on CNN, on the news. I mean, when the space shuttle, I don't know which one blew up, they spent like 3-4 days. All they did was replay 30 seconds of that clip on CNN. Just like, whoa, and it blew up. And then 2 minutes, not even a minute later, whoa, and it blew up. And people just couldn't get more of this. Like, I don't know why, but they just kept playing it. And can you imagine if someone, Jesus, they say he's the Messiah, the one we've been waiting for, and somebody's been raised from the dead. Now, he'd had other miracles. These are called signs. But now this is public news, number one. How do we respond? Because that's what we're doing. We're thinking about this. And so we want to look then how Mary, his friend, responds with this amazing gratitude. Truly, right? She thought, because she's convinced. And many people said that people that were there, they were all convinced. Because they went and told other people. Like, this man is not just a teacher, is not just a prophet. He is the Messiah. And she believed that with all her heart. And then we have the response number 2. hatred, true, premeditated, malicious hatred. Not just, feeling like, they knew the truth and yet still they had reason to do that. Somehow they justified it. And here was their thinking. We must stop him, this Jesus guy. We must stop him soon. Because if we don't stop him soon, everyone's going to believe him. It's really a problem to them that everyone's going to believe him. And if they do believe him, then they're going to follow him. And here's the problem. We're going to lose our status. We're going to lose our identity. In fact, Caiaphas said, we're going to lose our country, our nation. Let's read together. Now, if this works, Pon will show it, and I'll read it. Oh, by the way, thank you. Amazing what's going on, right? Like, things are happening, and we're projecting what we tried to do last week.
Yes.
Awesome. God's forming us. He's forming us and transforming us every day. All right, I want to read from John 11, starting at 45, and I'm going to John 12, 11 maybe, or 10. So you'll know when we get there. All right, 45. Then many of the Jews, as I said, who had come to Mary and had seen these things that Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things Jesus did. And then the chief priests and the Pharisees, they gathered together. They had a meeting, a council, and said, what shall we do? What shall we do with this Jesus? For this man works many signs. This man does these amazing miracles. Like, dead 4 days, now alive, having lunch with him. And if we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away, and here's what I was saying, both our place, like our position of power, and our nation, our identity, who we are. And verse 49 says, and one of them, Caiaphas, being the high priest that year, said to them, he says, that's only the half of it. You know nothing at all. Nor do you consider that it is expedient for us. Like, it makes sense. It's the best route, the best road to solving this problem. That one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. Now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he actually prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. Although he didn't know it, right? And not for that nation only, but also that he would gather all the nations together in one, the children of God who were scattered abroad. So in case I forget to say it again, God just used a total angry enemy to actually prophesy the truth. God can do that too. Verse 53. Then from that day on, they plotted to put him, being Jesus, to death. Therefore Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim, and there remained with his disciples. Verse 55. And the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Then they saw Jesus, and then they spoke among themselves, because they're kind of expecting a spectacle to be happening. They're kind of, where is he? As they stood in the temple court, and they said, so what do you think? Taking any bets? Is he going to show up for this Passover feast? 57. Now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, and then they would just pick him up. In order to find him. So we'll get him, and we'll stop him. All right, John 12, verse 1. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus leaves this kind of farther away place. We don't know how long he'd been there, maybe a month or two. And Jesus comes back to Bethany, where Lazarus was now living, always lived there, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. And there they made him supper. And Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. I'm imagining that there was the disciples, Jesus, a few other people, a nice gathering there, and they're going to have a meal together. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with this fragrance, this perfume of this oil. Verse 4 says, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him later on, said, why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii, that's a year's wages about, and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared really much about the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box and used to kind of dip into it every once in a while. Verse 7, but Jesus said, leave her alone. She has kept this day for my burial. She had kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have, but me you do not have always. Verse 9, now a great many of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But not just to see the spectacle of Lazarus living, but here's number 10, it tells you why. But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. So basically what they were saying is, we got to get rid of the evidence. We just got to get rid of anything. Get rid of Lazarus, get rid of Jesus. And it's like, and in their mind, because they believed, I guess they're thinking somehow they're going to fool God. They're going to trick God. They're really going against God and saying, you know, that's the pride of these guys, of the Pharisees and the priests of the day and the scribes. They're basically putting themselves above God. They said, you know, we see it. We know what's happening. I think if we just eradicate this, we can make it good again. Make it good again, according to their thoughts. All right, well, that's God's word for us and today. Somehow that means that it will apply to our lives and to everything else that we say from here on in. Thank you, Jesus. You know, I know that in this world, I've been like Caiaphas. Maybe not as mean or with pointing fingers, and not as deceived as he is. But so often we want to do things because they make sense, right? They seem to have a good, they're convenient. They cause less problems. Because if we do the right thing, sometimes there's a lot of problems. When we do the right things, it can divide people. It can cause problems, and people might talk, and there might be division. And so a lot of times I think, you know, I'm not saying Caiaphas did anything right, but he did what human nature sometimes wants to do. And I know that my own nature sometimes wants to do that. I want to do the right things and keep all people happy, right? But he was doing more than that. He was trying to protect his own turf, which wasn't right. And we read then in verse 35 that Mary had believed in Jesus, and then some of the people also had believed in Jesus, and they went to the Pharisees and they told them what happened, and they said, you know, how can we not believe? We've just seen what has happened. And in verse 37 we read that the chief priests and the Pharisees, They said, we got to have a meeting. We got to have an AGM. You know, whatever they called it. And they said, let's make a plan. Because if we don't fix this plan, everything's going to change. Everything's going to change. We're going to lose our status. We're going to lose our identity. We're going to indeed lose our very existence, our nation. Because somehow, in this misunderstanding, the Romans are going to get mad. And they're going to see us fumble. And they might just, you know, because we got this deal with them. We manage ourselves nice. We don't cause any problems. And then they'll just let us go along this way. Now, I don't know where this was going to fit in, but this is exactly what we do as the church. This applies. We don't want to cause problems. It's happening right now in China. Like the national church, they go, if we just do exactly what the government says, they won't cause us any problems. And then we can co-live together. It's kind of like taking us in a little reservation and say, if you stay in those boundaries. Now in Canada, North America, we talk about freedom. And freedom of religion. And freedom of speech. A lot of freedoms we have, so we think we don't have it here. But let me tell you, if I went into a school and told them what I believe, and it was a public school, you would hear them. They say, wait a minute, you go back to your connected community church. Don't bring your stuff in here. So what have we got? The same thing. So what do? Well, I don't go into the school, because I don't want to upset them. Because who knows, maybe then they won't treat my kids right. Now, there's a lot of that happening, but in verse 48, if you read that, it says, if we let him alone, like this, everyone's going to believe him. You know, God forbid, like everybody then will believe in Jesus. Well, what do you think is going to happen if we start preaching in the shopping center, and in the schools, and everywhere else? And because, what do you think they're worried about? Do you really think that they're worried, well, we might offend somebody. We might offend a person in case they're Muslim, or they're of a different religion background, or a different... Do you really believe that that's what they're really worried about? Absolutely not. It's a bigger spiritual battle going on. They're afraid because they will lose their turf. They do not want secularism to stop. Because everybody's going to believe this Jesus. Because if they actually allowed and supported us to go and preach the gospel everywhere, sooner or later, all those who are called by God will hear it and believe. And so what are they doing? And what are we doing? So that's the question. So in verse 49, Caiaphas, being the high priest then, that year, he said to them, you know nothing at all. Like, he was basically saying, I know even more the dangers of this guy. Why? Because he knew who he was. He knew who he was. And as a high priest, his job was to represent people to God and God to people. And what is he doing? Is he doing his job? He's hiding God from the people. He's trying. He's trying. But God cannot be hid. He can't. But he's going to try. And unknowingly, in verse 51, he actually prophesied what was going to happen. He asked the right question. He did. He said, what's the right thing to do here? We can always ask that question. And many people ask that question publicly. Politicians, schools, governments, leaders, public leaders. Right? That's what, you know, but they don't want you to talk about politics and religion, but they do ask these questions, like, what is the right thing to do? Because, well, we should be doing the right thing, right? Shouldn't we? But it's the answer that comes out wrong every time. The wrong answer. Because, in actual fact, he didn't really ask what's the right thing to do. He said, what's the expedient thing to do? So that no one gets upset. Because if we keep everything quiet, everybody's going to be happy. We go on the way we are, right? I hate to admit it, but I've done it in my workplace myself. I haven't tried to kill anybody to keep that way, but I've certainly in some ways compromised what I believe. In my workplace I've done it. Perhaps even in my family at times, in discussions. It's like, well, Joanne, we can't really deal with that way right now. Let me just, compromise. And sometimes it's wise, because you don't want to go in with a sledgehammer. But you cannot compromise the truth. The truth can never be compromised. Sometimes I've done it even in church. I'm thinking, well, I don't want to, we love people. We don't want to upset anybody, right? But the truth has to prevail, right? Verse 52 says, it's not for that nation only. But so what he had prophesied was exactly what was about to happen. Jesus was about to go to the cross to die for the sins of the world. Not just for that nation, but for the entire world. And he prophesied in not knowing one word of what he was saying, because all he was worried about was his little reservation of Jewish people that the Romans had given them. If you behave yourself within those walls, we'll even let you use everything you're doing, as long as you don't cause any trouble. And from that day on, it says in verse 53, when Caiaphas saw that, they plotted to kill him. Let me move along a little bit, so what we've just seen there is, I want to get to what Mary did, but we just saw this Caiaphas kind of premeditating how to get rid of Jesus. And it's pure hatred. And really, it has to become, in a sense, trying to cover up the truth of what had just happened. Versus this incredible, extravagant love that Mary just exhibited. So as they come then, in verse 56, they were basically, let's just go farther down. Let's go down to chapter 12, verse 1. It says, then 6 days before the Passover. And Jesus is, in case to answer the question, is he coming this year? Yes, he is. This year is the most spectacular, amazing, powerful Passover anybody's ever going to see. And it's coming, even for us, in about a month, that we keep celebrating it. This year is going to be the time when Jesus comes to this Passover. Only everybody's going to bring lambs and everything, but they don't need them, because Jesus is going to be the Lamb of God who pays for the sin of the world. He's going to go to the cross, and he's going to pay. This is going to be amazing. And it says, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus and Mary and Martha lived. And he came, I guess, with his disciples and a few people there, whom he had just raised from the dead, Lazarus. There, they made supper for him, and Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with Jesus. Sure, that happens to us every day. Guy was dead and buried for 4 days, now I'm having lunch with him. This is very interesting, right? And look at this. Look at this extravagant love. I just don't know how to explain it any other way. It's crazy love. A guy wrote a book, Crazy Love. He's a pretty good pastor. He wrote a book, Crazy Love. It's like you just give up everything. You give up everything for Jesus. And what are we asked to do? We are asked to do the same. It's not really crazy. It's what Jesus is asking us to do. Crazy love. It says, then Mary took a pound of very costly oil, perfume, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with this fragrance. Why is that extravagant? Well, it's very expensive perfume. It's not like Chanel number 5, it's like Chanel number 55,000. This thing cost $55,000 to buy a little bit of it. expensive. It was a year's wages. A whole year you would have to work to buy it if you just wanted to buy that. And she had been saving it because it's kind of like money in the bank, this stuff. Like you can trade it for things. I don't know how it was used, but it was like so valuable. And she took it, it's like this, and this just happened, this is your water. I didn't plan it, too bad. And she poured it. It's exactly the reaction. How could you do that?
Let's hope everything's turned off. You pour it on the floor. Shocking.
I just decided to do that because I think it would show you, I hadn't thought of it, but I had water in here. I had a cup. But she took this little jar and she poured it on his feet. And she grabbed him. I don't know, that's the pictures we see. I don't know how she did it. But she went to it like it's not. His feet weren't clean or anything, like he's been walking in what I call donkey poo-poo. And she just poured this amazing, expensive, like it's like going to the bank, take out 1 year of whatever your wages are, and you just go, here you go, it's yours. Whatever is needed. And even more frivolous than that, it's kind of like it's not really needed. You don't need it. It's not like Jesus needed this. But she's so extravagantly in love with Jesus, as we ought to be, that she's willing to take everything and just put it there, just whatever it is. Because you know what? Without Jesus, there is no tomorrow. That's what we say to people that we're in love with. Without you, there's no tomorrow. I don't want to live without you. I don't want to live without you, Jesus. But when we're in love, we say that to people. Can you see the craziness of this love? That's what I'm trying to point out. This incredible, extravagant, crazy love. But Judas said, whoa! I'm not saying you're Judas. You just worried about my carpet. But Judas, whoa! You realize now, I've done this before. I've been on a lot of, for the last 25 years, I've been on church boards and church leadership teams. Whoa! Are you kidding me? We're going to spend like $5,000 just to give food to the neighborhood? Are you kidding? They're never going to come to church just because you give them food. But we're not doing it because of that. We're madly in love with Jesus. We've got to give what we have. Because we love Jesus. And when they see that we love Jesus, they can't refuse Jesus. When they see what Jesus is doing in our life, they can't. So, but I do this too. It's natural. Whoa! You just threw away that? We could have sold that perfume. We could have made all this money, and we could have fed the poor. And Jesus said, you're always going to have the poor. But I'm only here just for another 6 days, and I'll be gone. Leave her alone. She's just being extravagant in her love for her Heavenly Father, which she knows. I think it's clear that there is a time to be extravagant when it comes to our faith, when it comes to Jesus. I think we're being called to be more extravagant than we are. I think we're being called to go out on a limb sometimes. I mean, just imagine if you knew someone that had just saved the life of someone else. I won't even put it in that the person was buried, decomposed for 4 days, and rose again. But let's just say that somebody just did something that risked their life to save somebody else's life, and they actually saved it. That person saved your son's life. Let's say it's your son, or daughter, or wife, or someone that you love so dear that you couldn't even picture living without that person anymore. And somebody comes along and says, You know, I'm going to risk my life, because when I do this, I know what's going to happen, right? People, I'm going to expose who I am, and then my life will be in danger, but that person will be safe. This happens all the time. Like, people will give away a kidney. I'm endangering my life to save your life. Somebody at Emmaus, a young man at Emmaus, was basically had one kidney, then he had no kidney, dialysis. And another person said, you know what, I'll give you one of my kidneys, I got two. Well, that's a lot to give, right? Because now you're endangering your life, because now you only got two, now you got one, and if something goes wrong with yours, because it's going to have to work harder, you're going to lose your kidney, and then you could die. But somebody, extravagant love, this is kind of applicable, way not as much as Mary, but in a way it is, even more, because you're actually giving your life. You say, I'll give you my kidney, because you need it. Even though I might die one day a little bit sooner. And that man, his name is Ian, he is doing wonderful. Been sick all his life because he had some disease, and now he's got this one kidney that's working, and he is just a wonderful guy. We're back at work, doing stuff. I've known two people like that, and somebody donated a kidney. But what I'm saying is, this person now comes for dinner. They've basically just, like, your life would have been over, and now you're having dinner. What are you going to do? Are you going to be extravagant? Well, you cook a great meal, sure. You do this, you do that, but what are you going to do? Will you go, well, I don't have one whole year's of wages sitting there to buy perfume and put it on that guy's foot. Well, no, you don't have to do that. But what are you going to do? Well, you know, remember the widow's offering? Well, she didn't have all the money that all those other pompous people throwing money in the money bin as they're going through because it's like tax. She only had 2 pennies. It was her only 2 pennies, and she just walked by and very humbly, like making sure, like she wasn't doing anything that would bring attention to her, and she puts the money in, and Jesus is just standing there, and he's looking from the side of his eyes, and he says to his disciples, take a look. That woman, she just threw in 2 pennies. That's all she had in her whole life. She put it in there. Out of the overwhelming of her love for God, she put in way more than the thousands upon thousands of dollars that those other people are throwing in to show how great their status is. Jesus is throwing everything upside down, not just the tables, everything. Everything is changing. I have to keep going. What would you do? Imagine. Would you be extravagant or would you be practical? The answer, of course, to answer Judas' claim was, well, this he said, not because he really cared for the poor. Now, if he cared for the poor, and he was a real giver, like, you know, Salvation Army, serving people practically, and we need the money, and he's giving his life to do that, that'd be cool. But that's not what he was doing. He didn't really care. God knew in his heart he didn't care for the poor. He's just saying that. He just wants to keep the money where he knows it is, because one day he could just dip into it anytime he wanted, because he carried the money box. And he could just grab that money anytime he wanted, use it for his own good, for what he wanted to use it for. There's a kind of another lesson there is no illusion at all. How much can we change the world without Jesus? How much can money change the world? We can't. There are so many pastors that have tried. I know a pastor that tried to do street ministry right here in Wally, and he burned out. Why? Because he set himself up thinking that if we can solve the immediate need of people, that somehow that will help. Now it does help, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but you're going to be so disappointed if that's what you're thinking you're doing. Because what you do is, you go over there, you love on people, you feed people, that's it. If they say, why did you do it? Because you're not bearing fruit. I know these people that talk about bearing fruit. If you don't see visible fruit, they're so clear-cut. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need some people like that, because we need to be accountable. But they just talk about bearing fruit. Well, how do you know you're not bearing fruit? But they become so disappointed. You have to have a lesson on how to be on fire for God, and maybe even when it looks like you're not bearing fruit. Because if not, you're going to quit. You won't be representing Jesus anymore. You go into those places and people will do things that disappoint you and it makes you want to quit. I've wanted to quit the ministry 2 or 3 times. Where I was so disappointed. I was thinking, this is it. I don't want to do it anymore, God. And he said, well, Tony, what's your expectations? What do you think you're going to do? I've given you something to do. Just keep doing it. Let me worry about the results. Let me worry about, don't expect things and then get yourself disappointed. Mary's not worrying right now about practical. She's putting all of that on there. She didn't save that jar of $55,000 Chanel number 55,000 perfume. I just made that up this morning. Just for what? What is going to be a better moment? My brother was dead. 4 days he stunk in the cave. And now we're having lunch together. What better moment to take this perfume and show my gratitude? When am I going to use it again? Maybe tomorrow might not even be there. And that's the sad part of it. It's amazing what Mary did, but Caiaphas, he should have been there with the chief priest, with the scribes, with the Pharisees, with the Jewish leaders. He should have upset the whole thing, and he said, listen, you elected me as chief priest. Let me tell you, this guy is real. Grab your perfume. Grab whatever is the most important thing to you and just lay it at his feet. That's what Caiaphas should have said. Could have said. But he didn't. And that's the problem. The Bible says, what shall it profit a man or a woman if you gain the whole world and you lose your soul? How are we going to profit from that in the light of eternity? Please understand, I'm not telling you to be irresponsible with your finances. I'm not preaching finances. But our life, how do we surrender it to Jesus? His response was full of rage, calculated, premeditated murder, regardless of what he knew was true about this Jesus. Willing to do whatever it took to stop. I don't know what his life ended up like, but you gotta feel sorry for him. So sad. Mary, on the other hand, rejoicing, extravagant, and her family, they respond to the truth. And Mary was right. And Jesus was right. In less than a week, Jesus would go and show the most extravagant, amazing love ever shown in the history of our world, regardless of how old you think our world is. He would go to the cross for the whole world, everyone. And here's the most shocking thing of all, even Caiaphas. Even Caiaphas. He died to rescue his friends. But even more so, I believe he died to rescue his enemies. Those who were really cheering on to put him on the cross. And that's Easter coming for us. As Jesus, we celebrate, we remember. So Mary was right. Extravagant love doesn't count cost in dollars and in cents. But believe me, it does cost. It costs your heart. You have to be willing to give it. It costs your life. We have to give our life to Jesus so that he can resurrect our life into newness. Dollars and cents will become less and less meaningful as we grow older and older until that day when they will be completely meaningless. But what we do and how we honor Christ will last forever and may bear fruit forever in the kingdom. And somehow it's not always practical, and it's even hard to understand, but we must. Focus you even on the miracle of childbirth and how God can do that and bring life into the world that was not there, right out of a cave-like womb, so to speak. And he can take our own lives who have been at times